This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stocks rebounded today. That's after seeing their worst week in 8.5 years this past week. Traders say investors are now hoping that global monetary policy responses will help offset the impact of the coronavirus outbreak. Now, as a result, MSCI's index of emerging market shares rose 1.3% on the day. That's after losing 7.3% last week. South Africa's JSE tracking higher global markets, climbing almost 2% today. In Nigeria, a number of FMCG players were a drag on the all-share index. Lafarge, Nestle and Unilever specifically fell 10% on the day. A pretty big drag on the market today. Now, also coming up on today's show. 2 new cases of coronavirus are reported in Algeria as the world fights the outbreak. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa calls for a discussion on the public wage bill. And New York now bans the use of single-use plastics. Well, we begin tonight's show with the latest on the coronavirus. Tunisia has confirmed its first case of the deadly virus. Health Minister Abdelatif El Maki said at a news conference that the patient was a Tunisian man. Now, Algeria has also reported 2 more cases of the deadly COVID-19 disease. According to the country's health ministry, the 2 patients are a woman and her daughter, both aged 53 and 24 years respectively. They are believed to have contracted the virus from an 83-year-old Frenchman and his daughter, whom they had hosted. Last week, Algeria announced its first coronavirus case. In West Africa, Senegal has confirmed its first case of the deadly virus. Health Minister Abdoulaye Diouf told reporters that the patient is a Frenchman who lives in Senegal and flew back from France on February 26th. Now, in Nigeria, 4 Chinese nationals and 39 locals have been quarantined in Plateau State in the northern part of the country. That's over fears that they have been infected with the coronavirus. Nigeria confirmed its first case of the deadly virus last Thursday. Here's CGTN's Uche Okoronkwo reporting.
The Plateau State government confirmed on Sunday that it had quarantined 43 people in the Wasi local government area, a settlement 134 miles southeast of Jos, the state capital. The State Commissioner of Health, Mr. Nimkonglar Ndam, revealed that those quarantined include 4 Chinese nationals and 39 others working with them on a mining site in the area. Mr. Ndam said that the Chinese miners had recently traveled from China en route through Addis Ababa to Abuja and finally to Wasi, where they worked. The commissioner added that the 43 would remain in isolation for a period of 14 days to check if they developed symptoms. He also urged the state residents not to panic as adequate measures had been put in place to detect the infection and to ensure that any potential cases do not spread. The State Ministry of Health says it is working with the Nigerian Center for Disease Control to provide adequate support in case the suspects tested positive for COVID-19. Nigeria has so far confirmed only 1 case of the coronavirus, which has killed more than 2,900 people since December last year. The Nigeria COVID-19 case is an Italian national who arrived in the country last week. The Italian has been quarantined in a medical facility in Lagos, while more than 100 people who had contact with him are being identified and kept in isolation. President Buhari has urged Nigerians to stay calm and not to panic, stating that undue alarm would do more harm than good. Uche Okoronkwo, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
Now, Egypt has announced its second confirmed COVID-19 case. The patient is a foreigner who reportedly interacted with people at a petroleum company in a remote area near the border with Libya. He has been quarantined and his health is being closely monitored. Here is CGTN's Adel El Maroui with the story.
The Egyptian Health Ministry and the World Health Organization have both confirmed a new COVID-19 case in Egypt. A foreigner who has arrived to the country about 2 weeks ago and has shown minor symptoms of the disease.
He is a Canadian citizen who works as a petroleum engineer in an Egyptian company. He arrived on February 19th. He has been immediately moved to Egypt's Al Negela Hospital, a place dedicated for COVID-19.
There is already higher demand on Egyptian public healthcare services than those available. It's why Egypt fears an outbreak of COVID-19 would put more burden on an already overloaded healthcare network. It's why the government says it has taken what it describes as tough measures against all of those who came in contact with the new case.
The closest two people to the case, a driver and a nurse, and the rest of his colleagues at work have all tested negative for the coronavirus so far. That person came to Cairo from Canada via transit in Germany. From the airport in Cairo, he directly moved to work and has not come in contact with any other people on the way. It's still not clear where he was infected.
This is the second COVID-19 case reported in Egypt. The first was a Chinese citizen who had shown no symptoms. He stayed in Egypt's quarantine hospital for 2 weeks until he tested negative for the coronavirus. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Now, elsewhere, Portugal, Andorra, Indonesia and Jordan also reported their first cases on Monday as the virus continues to spread around the world. In China, however, the number of new cases has reached a new low, with around 200 reported on Sunday. Over 90% of them were in Hubei province, where the outbreak began. Across the country, nearly 3,000 more patients have been discharged from hospitals, and no new deaths were reported outside of Hubei. China's total number of cases now stands at more than 80,000. More than half have recovered and over 2,900 have died. Now, outside China, more than 9,000 cases have been reported in over 60 nations, with 152 deaths. South Korea reported nearly 600 new cases on Monday, raising the total to over 4,300 cases. Japan also has nearly 1,000 confirmed cases so far. Italy has the largest tally outside Asia, reaching over 1,700 cases. Now, Iran, the worst hit country in the Middle East, has reported over 500 new cases, bringing its overall tally past the 1,500 mark. More than 60 people have died in the country. Of course, later in the bulletin, we'll look at China's efforts to contain the virus and, of course, reduce the number of new infections. Let's shift focus now. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has suggested focused discussions between the government and trade unions to slow the rate at which public sector wages are growing. Tito Mboweni, the country's finance minister, proposed $10.3 billion of cuts to the public sector wage bill during a budget speech last week. Mboweni's budget drew an angry response from unions, which could shut down parts of the economy if they don't get their way. Now, some analysts have expressed skepticism that Ramaphosa's government aims to put an end to large annual wage increases for public servants. Growth in the wage bill has been seen as crowding out spending on projects that drive economic growth and items that are critical for service delivery. Well, let's get the latest on ground. We're now joined by Angelo Coppola. He is in Johannesburg. Angelo, as always, good to have you on the show. Now, of course, we hear trade unions have flatly refused to agree to the proposal to revisit that 3-year wage deal. Finance Minister Tito Mboweni says that difficult discussions lay ahead, but he also seems confident that there will be an agreement made. So is it likely this will happen, and what are the options on the table?
Well, Uche, this is going to be one of those very tough battles. It's also unclear where the finance minister is getting his confidence from. But Mboweni and by extension the President Ramaphosa have nailed their colours to the mast. Costs do need to be cut, there's no question about that. But it's not going to happen by reducing government departments. That was something that Cyril Ramaphosa proposed some 2 years ago in his first State of the Nation. So that hasn't happened yet, so they won't be cutting costs there. And the unions aren't budging because one would assume that the 2-year-old agreement is a binding agreement. So analysts can't really see what's to be negotiated. Talks will apparently take place within NEDLAC within the next short while, we understand, but there are no more details there. But of course, the question is whether the unions will actually, in fact, agree to even sit down and talk. Many union members will most likely see that as a concession and an abdication of their right, and then therefore they think that they will lose to a government and they'll have to renegotiate their wages. So we'll first wait to see if the talks happen, and if they do happen, what the ground rules are. Uche.
Well, Angelo, looking at the realities that the Treasury is facing right now, the state wage bill does account for over a third of total government spending. And of course, that's crowded out spending on other critical areas such as state-owned enterprises. The deficit is also projected to reach 6.8% of GDP in the year to March 2021. So does the Treasury have any other options beyond wage cuts at this point?
Well, the bottom line is they don't. They have no options, really. The president can't reduce the size of his cabinet. He could do it, but he won't, because that will save several $1 million annually, so we won't see any movement there. There's also the very large VIP protection budget that could be cut, but it's all small potatoes in comparison to that huge public sector wage bill. Government, of course, could sell some of the hundreds of state-owned entities that it controls. That could raise a few $100 million as well. But the problem is the debt servicing costs have now almost reached the point where they are actually more than the actual budgets allocated to most of the public government departments. So it's the wage bill, and dare I say it, let's get rid of SAA and possibly privatize Eskom, as some people are calling for. But the bottom line is the government has to grow the economy, and that will generate more revenue for the government and obviously for the country. But that's not going to happen in the short term. So they've got to cut those costs, and the public sector wage bill does seem to be the obvious low-hanging fruit.
Well, Angela, how worrying is the road ahead in terms of these discussions with trade unions? Because we do know that wage strikes in the country, they've shut down parts of the economy before, especially when they don't get their way, as we mentioned. What are the implications if the government does push ahead with its plan to cut wages?
Well, look, the COSATU Federation and their affiliates have already, and in fact they aren't budging, they've already said that they will fight government on this. The other major federation or union federation in South Africa, SAFTU, says the budget, as they call it, is a declaration of war on the working class and the poor. And the narrative doesn't bode well for a productive economic period in the next couple of weeks to months. Unions will also face calls from their members to protect those interests that they have, especially because there is an agreement in place, and it seems that it's got another 12 months to run. So strikes are a big likelihood and are probably going to be the order of the day. And in this depressed economy that we have in South Africa at the moment, and there's a possibility, of course, of a ratings downgrade around the corner, it's something that the country can ill afford at the moment.
Well, speaking of that ratings downgrade, how are markets responding to the situation currently? Because we did see financial markets cheering on the budget proposal. The rand gained as much as 0.8% against the dollar on that news. And of course, as you mentioned, it could also save the country from a ratings downgrade. But given the union's response, how long will this sentiment on the market last?
Well, look, the ZAR versus the US dollar spot actually weakened in the last month from 1488 to 1564 today. So the currency has moved sideways since Thursday, since the budget on Wednesday, and from Thursday. So it's moved in that sideways band, and it hasn't done anything much there. And it won't need much to weaken again. But we must remember that most of the reason for the weakening has to do with external factors that are driving it, that are happening in the US, the COVID-19 virus, and the uncertainty around what's going to happen there and whether South Africa is going to get its first case or not. And it's likely to weaken if unions maintain that stance of theirs, and there's no indication that they will actually soften their position right now. In fact, COSATU, in their closing remarks at their latest national meeting last week, Thursday, were adamant. They reject what they call the government's narrow fixation with public service wage bills. They call the budget a provocative one, and they see it as a challenge from National Treasury, which they say they gladly accept. So the fight is on, and the currency and the economy are likely to suffer in the short term as a result, Uche.
Well, lots of uncertainty ahead. Many thanks once again for your insights, Angelo. That's Angelo Coppola joining us in Johannesburg. Now let's head to Zimbabwe. The Associated Mine Workers Union has reached a deal with the Chamber of Mines that will result in members' salaries being almost tripled in the first quarter of 2020. The increment in the Southern African nation will result in the lowest earning employee receiving $192 a month. According to the Chamber of Mines, Zimbabwe's mining sector has 40,000 registered employees. The union had initially sought a 67% increase for its lowest paid members. Well, let's now take a look at our corporate headlines today. Visa has confirmed its entry into the Sudanese market in the field of electronic payments. The move could give impetus to the steps aimed at ending the country's isolation from the global banking system. Now, even though the U.S. in 2017 lifted comprehensive economic sanctions on Sudan, global companies have been unwilling to operate in the country for the fear of the risk of fines. And Zambia's African Green Resources has launched an $81 million financing program. The financing will help the company and its partners to provide farm supplies and technology to farmers in exchange for grain. It is part of a broader plan by African Green Resources to invest about $150 million in Zambia for projects including a 50-megawatt solar farm and irrigation dam. And Egypt's Suez Canal generated over $450 million in February. A total of 1,525 ships also crossed the canal last month. This represents a 12.7% year-on-year rise from February 2018. Now, the Suez Canal is one of the Egyptian government's main sources of foreign currency. It serves as the fastest means of shipping goods between Europe and Asia. And Jack Welch, the champion of corporate efficiency who led General Electric through 20 years of its greatest financial success, has died. He was 84 years old. Named Manager of the Century by Fortune magazine in 1999, Welch became CEO of GE in 1981 and led it until his retirement in 2001. During his tenure, he grew General Electric, a $12 billion company that made light bulbs and appliances, into the second most valuable company in the world. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a short break now, still to come. Businesses in Zimbabwe desperate to stay operational as power prices rise. And IGAD member countries unveil a master plan to connect the region.
2020 is said to be an eventful year for African economies. The continent of over 1.2 billion people is on the verge of creating the world's largest free trade area by member states. But the rules of trade are yet to be finalized, and it remains to be seen what industries countries will and will not protect. So what does the private sector need to thrive in an era where trade disputes keep rising at home and abroad? These issues and plenty more will be debated in the 2020 edition of the Africa CEO Forum.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay,
We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidoo. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back. Now in Zimbabwe, the latest power tariff hike in the country is squeezing businesses who of course are already battling with high operating costs. Now Zimbabwe Electricity Supply Authority raised tariffs by about 19% last week, citing inflation and a depreciation of the local currency. CGTN's Farai Mwakutoya has that story.
Zimbabwe's second tariff adjustment in just 4 months has left energy-dependent businesses beleaguered.
Before load shedding atanga
2 years ago, before the load shedding began, I would use $120 on electricity for a whole week. But now, it can run out in just 1 day.
They've been forced between a rock and a hard place.
Either they absorb the tariff increase and eat into their profit margins, or they pass on the cost to their customers. However, with many of those clients unable to pay current prices, that may mean missing out on potential business.
The latter is not an option for Manatsa.
Our clients are experiencing the same economic challenges we are, and since I need to take something home at the end of the day, I end up trying to accommodate the customer.
For many here, staying afloat has become a delicate balance.
We now negotiate with clients first to find a price that's affordable for them, and that allows us to still walk away with something. Only when we agree do we buy prepaid electricity and start working on their job.
It's an unorthodox and inefficient model, but unavoidable in a high-cost environment made worse by intermittent supplies.
For me, the biggest cost has not just been about the increase in that tariff, but the fact that electricity is still in short supply. So businesses have had to rely on alternative sources such as diesel-powered generators, and it's very expensive. So the cost of doing business in the country remains very high. It's not sustainable.
Zimbabwe has been importing power from neighboring South Africa and Mozambique after receding water levels cut generation at its main Kariba hydropower plant. Farai Mwakutoya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Meanwhile, the 8 member states of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, or IGAD, are now developing an infrastructure master plan intended to ease connectivity. The plan will see Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan and Uganda share resources like electricity. It will also open up roads and waterways to create an environment for investment and trade. From Entebbe, here's CGTN's Isabel Nakiria.
Trucks delivering goods across borders in East Africa, like this one between Uganda and South Sudan, often face hours of gridlock. This is costing businesses millions of dollars for the delays spent in transit. At times, perishables go bad along the way. IGAD member states want to see a smooth flow in movement of goods and people.
We are heading to add a lot of value to the African integration, the African free trade area, and we are wishing that our community in the IGAD region will benefit a lot from the integration efforts.
Some countries in the East African region have tried to relax trade barriers along borders. One-stop border points have been opened where traders pay taxes under one roof at the borders. This has made business much easier and faster for traders. This is the same system that IGAD states would like to replicate.
So a big part of what we are doing is to make sure that the developmental pathway and the role infrastructure plays in it leads to the SDGs and leads to this inclusive, climate-friendly, resilient growth that creates, through trade, peace and prosperity in the IGAD region.
IGAD countries are also identifying projects like power dams in the region that can be shared. Disputes over resources like the construction of the Grand Renaissance Dam that is causing a rift with countries that share the Nile waters will be addressed. Regional states are expected to commit to the funding of the projects. The master plan, once developed, will lead to more regional cooperation and strengthen ties between states. IGAD hopes trade and investment within the region will be boosted, leading to economic prosperity. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Entebbe, Uganda.
Now, Somalia has welcomed a historic decision by the World Bank to normalize ties. The move is a part of efforts to have Somalia's public debt written off, allowing it to access international aid, which is critical to transforming the impoverished nation. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello has more.
The decision to re-establish ties between Somalia and the global money lending institution was reached following a series of meetings. The country's finance minister, leading the Somali delegation to the talks in Washington, says the task ahead is enormous, but the latest endorsement from the international community is encouraging.
What we've been able to achieve today is show the world that as Somalis we are capable of coming together and achieving great things. The World Bank has attested to it. The international community has done the same. We've achieved all benchmarks set for us in a very short period of time.
The normalization of ties is expected to open a new chapter in the country's relations with financial lending institutions like World Bank, the International Monetary Fund and the African Development Bank. The Horn of Africa nation is seeking debt relief under the heavily indebted Poor Countries Program. The country's external debt stands at about $5.2 billion that has been declared unsustainable by IMF.
The arrears clearance and the normalization is an important first step. But what is most important, that we continue to support proactively Somalia in the months and years ahead in all its development aspiration. That is about providing the youth job opportunities, to providing education chances for girls and boys, to have health centers where women can go when they are pregnant and have a good treatment.
Last year, World Bank reopened offices in the country for the first time in 3 decades. Authorities say the move is a testament of increased donor confidence in its finance reforms program, one of which has been revenue mobilization that continues to record a steady growth in recent years.
This will allow Somalia to basically exit a situation of unsustainable debt and being able to focus its full energy again on the development rather to be burdened by unsustainable debt. So this is a very important another milestone for Somalia, and a critical one because it will allow the further normalization of its financial relationships with the international community.
A decision point is expected to be reached in March after the International Monetary Fund has secured $334 million to offset Somalia's public debt from more than 100 member countries. Authorities now hope to seek financial assistance in efforts to rebuild a nation destroyed by decades of conflict. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
You are watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but do stay with us. Lots more to come.
No war, no one again he can hold in guns.
Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
The Excellency, thank you very much for your time now. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okoronkwo reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Just about 1:30, let's recap today's top headlines. Tunisia and Senegal have become the latest countries to report new cases of the coronavirus in Africa. Now, the patients are a Tunisian man and a French man in Senegal. Algeria has also reported 2 more cases of the deadly disease. And at least 50 people have been killed and several others injured as gunmen suspected to be bandits attacked some villages in Nigeria's northwestern state of Kaduna. Now, according to local reports, the attackers stormed the villages in the early hours of Sunday morning, shortly after religious prayers. And Tunisia has hosted the 37th session of the Arab Interior Ministers' Council. The agenda of this latest meeting includes the examination of issues that threaten Arab peace. And lastly, Greece and Hungary are closing their borders to asylum seekers amid the coronavirus outbreak. Both countries announced the measures as Turkey opened its border over the weekend for migrants to find their way to the European Union. And that was a recap of today's top headlines. Now, on the international front, beginning March 1st, stores in New York will no longer be allowed to give out plastic bags. The statewide ban aims to reduce an estimated 23 billion plastic bags, which are used there every year. But the ban comes many years after similar programs were introduced in other parts of the world, and critics say if it doesn't go far enough to protect the environment. Here's CGTN's Sarah Walton reporting.
For decades, New Yorkers have used plastic bags for shopping. But from March, residents will have to use these paper bags or bring their own from home. The state has banned most stores from giving out single-use plastic bags. This Manhattan supermarket began preparing a year ago, but not all their customers were ready.
Generally, in life, people don't like change, whatever it is. So people are apprehensive. The biggest complaint that I get, believe it or not, is what are we going to use for our garbage bags?
The bag waste reduction law targets more than just grocery stores. There will be some exceptions, such as in pharmacies, but state legislators are asking everyone to cut back where they can.
It's estimated 23 billion plastic bags are used in New York State every year. Many are recycled, but most end up in landfill, in waterways or the street.
Critics say just banning the bags doesn't go far enough, as over 90% of plastic waste in the US isn't recycled. And New York isn't the first place to introduce such a ban. In 2002, Bangladesh became the first country to ban thin plastic bags.
New Yorkers value their convenience. It's a very fast-moving place. These bans are just the beginning of an effort to try to deal with the plastic problem that the world has. We're going to need to develop biodegradable plastics. We're going to need to reduce our use of these kinds of substances.
This grocery store in Brooklyn decided against using plastic bags before the ban was imposed. The owner says there should be more of a focus on education rather than waiting for regulation.
I see it more and more, people just bringing their own bag. It's becoming a norm. It's not a big deal, really. I don't know if one needs a government to tell them, don't use that bag. I think it can come from an individual too.
The governor of New York says the plastic bag ban is just one step towards protecting the environment, and there's more work to be done. People will now have several months to get used to the new rules, after which retailers could be fined up to $500 for violations. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
Well, let's head to the UK now, where business groups are lobbying to get in the room on Brexit trade negotiations to make their voices of the voices of small and medium-sized firms heard. But many British businesses aren't sitting on their hands while the details are being thrashed out. Well, Juliet Mann found out how some firms are changing their focus to mitigate ongoing Brexit uncertainty.
From the kitchen counter to artisan on an industrial scale, this family-run confectionery firm makes 1 million meringues a day. They're stocked all over the UK, with a small customer base in Europe. But Brexit has them rethinking their expansion plans.
We will not be actively seeking European partners. We have growing to do. We've got a factory to fill. We've got overheads to cover with sales that come in. So we have to look where the easiest opportunities are for us right now. And the easiest opportunity right now is not in Europe.
Clarity from the UK government on Brexit sticking points, from food labelling to tariffs and red tape, would keep them sweet.
This salted caramel meringue is a company bestseller, a big hit in Germany, the Netherlands and Northern Ireland, and now in the United States.
Okay, what other opportunities are there outside of Europe, which is where we started looking at China, we started looking at the US. We're looking to the Far East, so we're doing quite a lot in the Gulf, entry points. Kuwait, small market, but fantastic opportunities. Saudi, there's loads of landscape for us to grow in other parts of the world.
It's not just trade. In this Brexit transition phase, finding people with the right skill set is proving tricky.
So if you're a company and you're looking to expand business abroad, you need to help somebody to smooth the way when it comes to deal making. Those people that smooth the way are linguists.
In a business built on speaking more than one language, the UK seems less attractive for high-skilled employees.
The emotional response was they felt rejected and people were not coming in. This was very specifically something that we found with German native speakers, and Germans just simply stopped coming, actually. So the result was that those that did come were requiring and were demanding higher salaries. There was a scarcity as well. This was a problem. This is a problem for us. The only way to deal with this is to look at trading outside of the EU. So look at China, look at Japan, look at Korea. These are our next projects, basically.
Firms of all flavours feel it's crunch time for a trade deal with the EU to be wrapped up soon.
This showstopper meringue is made by hand, which makes it quite fragile, which is why it needs clever packaging. A little bit like the Brexit trade talks, handled with care.
If not, British exporters may find themselves dispatching to markets new.
Meanwhile, global stocks have rebounded but still remain quite volatile. This as investors weigh concerns about the economic impact of the coronavirus outbreak. Now, on Monday, futures tied to the S&P 500 index gave up early gains to drop about 1.1% on the day. European stocks also reversed a course, with the Stoxx Europe 600 retreating 1.4%. With more on this, here's CGTN's Patrick Falk.
At idyllic Lake Geneva, concerns over the coronavirus must have felt a world away just weeks ago. Ask people here whether they thought they'd now be under threat. Here's what they had to say.
Not immediately, but I thought that it will come here in Europe.
We should have taken action a long time ago, when it actually happened in Italy.
Switzerland borders Italy's worst-hit northern region, and it's beginning to spread fear here. The government's already banned gatherings of more than 1,000 people. In Milan, authorities are desperately trying to restore normality following a week of curbs imposed in much of Italy's north. But reports suggest the situation could be much worse.
Experts that have been conducting laboratory tests on the virus say that it may have circulated around northern Italy for weeks before it was detected, and that's going to make it harder to track and control its spread across Europe.
Among the countries that have reported infections, including several firsts in the last few days, 14 can be traced to Italy. The World Health Organization says so long as infections can be traced, it makes it easier to contain the spread. That's why a new case that's emerged in the US may cause alarm. It's not known where the infection originated.
We don't know how this person became infected with COVID-19. It's too soon to say what impact this case has on family, friends, coworkers, or the Lake Oswego School District and other members of the community. Contact tracing is our top priority right now.
Meantime, the coronavirus continues to plague the global economy. February manufacturing activity in China hit an all-time low, worse than during the 2008 financial crisis. That data, released on Saturday, could add downward pressure to stock markets when they open on Monday. Patrick Falk, CGTN, Geneva.
Meanwhile, in China, the coronavirus has certainly taken its toll on the country's manufacturing sector. Both the official and a private gauge of factory activity showed their worst reading on record. Our correspondent Xia Cheng explains.
China's first quarter GDP growth could look shaky. That's indicated by the record low PMI readings for February. Private Caixin survey shows manufacturing purchasing managers index hits a 16-year low due to record drops in new orders, output, and jobs. The result came in at 40.3, down from 51.1 in January. That's even weaker than the 40.9 in November 2008 in the height of the global financial crisis. Anything below 50 means contraction. Caixin tracks mostly smaller companies. The official survey, which tracks bigger firms, had even worse results. The China-US trade war has capped the official factory PMI in contraction for most of 2019 before a late-year rebound. Now it has nosedived to 35.7, below the former record low of 38.8 during the financial crisis. Similarly, factory production and new orders are suffering. Service industry indicator, the non-manufacturing PMI, dropped to 29.6 from 54.1 in January, the lowest since November 2011. Overall, companies are not buying materials for production. The coronavirus outbreak has caused nationwide transport curbs and required tough public health measures. They have put the economic activities at a standstill. Official data showed that only a third of China's small and medium-sized companies have resumed production. Those who have gone back to work are reportedly running below normal capacity. Bear in mind, these small and mid-sized firms create more than 80% of jobs and over 60% of GDP for China. Overall, analysts estimate that China's economy is running at only a fifth of its normal capacity. The stock market is in panic as many global brands have major factories in China. Some are dumping shares of Apple and Tesla, trimming their positions in energy stocks as crude prices plummeted, and selling their shares in airlines. Many nervous investors are snapping up safe haven bonds. Yields on the US 10-year Treasury note hit an all-time low on Friday. Bond yields move inversely to prices. But economists I've spoken to say they are waiting for more economic numbers for March to see a clearer picture here, without a distortion of the Chinese New Year. There is some positivity here. The Caixin PMI suggests manufacturers widely expect production to rebound once the epidemic controls are lifted. The sub-index for future output expectations, which measures how optimistic factories are about their production over the next 12 months, rose to a 5-year high in February. Xia Cheng, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, COVID-19 has also caused millions of Chinese students to stay at home as an extra precaution. But that doesn't mean they're lagging behind on their studies. As the coronavirus forces temporary school closures, online classes are now booming. CGTN's Wu Lei is in Shanghai to explain how students there are receiving more online education from the comfort of their homes.
Sun Jiayi may appear to be glued to the television set at home, but she's actually taking online classes, ranging from English to public health lessons. Her school is closed due to the coronavirus, but studying at home comes with its set of challenges.
Maybe some food or other things, or the mobile phone, you can put them away. When you're having lessons, although the teacher cannot hear your voice maybe, but you can try to answer it and talk to yourself.
From March the 2nd, Millions of students in Shanghai will be attending online lessons from home. The Shanghai Municipal Education Commission has chosen over 1,000 teachers to pre-record these online classes. Wu Wentao is one of them.
We teachers are quite used to the physical environment of the classroom, but now we have to adapt to the teaching online. In this current situation, I can't see how they react to my lessons. As I'm talking in front of the camera.
If students have any questions or feedback, they can ask their teachers after class is over. Many teachers say digital teaching requires more preparation time.
We need to prepare pictures, voices, and videos to present our lessons in advance. Teachers need more time to search and handle multimedia resources.
Each one of these online classes will last for about 20 to 30 minutes. Students will be offered 5 or 6 classes a day in order to limit screen time to 2 hours a day. Shanghai plans to broadcast these classes on 12 cable TV channels, one for each academic grade.
There are more than 1 million primary and secondary school students. We have to use the most effective and direct teaching methods. All lessons will be available on both TV and on various internet platforms.
All schools and universities are encouraged to offer online lessons. While this might be easier for urban schools with ample resources, it might not apply to schools from the lesser developed regions. After such a long holiday, most students and teachers couldn't wait to return to their classes. But educational authorities say schooling will not be back to normal until the virus is fully contained. Besides taking classes at home, Sun Jiayi also exercises regularly so that she can remain fit and return to school as soon as they are reopened. Wu Lei, CGTN, Shanghai.
Now, the atmosphere in Italy is no doubt growing more tense daily. The country has the largest tally of COVID-19 cases outside Asia, with over 1,700 people confirmed to have the disease. But rather than succumb to fear, some Italians have opted to laugh in the face of danger.
Genoa's Mangini 1876 bar and patisserie has unveiled a coronavirus-inspired pastry that has become an immediate success among locals. Pastry chef Gianluca Soressa says he and his colleagues came up with the idea earlier this week as a little joke, a playful way to cope with the panic. The majority of Italy's cases have been reported in Lombardy, a populous region that includes Italy's financial hub, Milan. Now the pastry chefs at the popular cafe bar are busy trying to keep up with the demand for their new creation. The pastry has been designed to resemble a CDC computer rendering of the COVID-19.
The bottom is made of short crust pastry, quite crumbly, typically Genoese. Then there's a chocolate dome that holds the virus, so to say, inside. And for the inside, we've made a namalaka, a Japanese-style cream, and we've added orange peel to fight the virus and orange flowers as a symbol of hope that everything will turn out all right in the end.
Another version has coffee instead of orange peel and flowers. Upstairs, the new pastries are in high demand, with customers either enjoying them at the bar with a coffee or seated at tables.
If nothing else, the coronavirus pastry will protect us from anxiety, fears, and phobias.
The new invention has sparked some criticism from some locals who say the virus is no joking matter. But the atmosphere at Mangini 1876 is lighthearted, with customers ordering 2 coronavirus pastries, please, and the cashier replying with a smile.
We're tired of polemics. Let's look at the beauty of the idea. It's so good. It got something inside like orange flowers. It will definitely make me stronger.
With Italy's rapidly growing coronavirus caseload, the need for humorous relief will not go away, but nor will the arguments of those urging Italians to take the threat seriously. Shen Li, CGTN.
Well, let's move on now. Here's a quick look at how commodities performed today. Oil prices jumping more than 3%, as of course hopes of a deeper cut in output by OPEC and stimulus from central banks did counter worries about damage to demand from the coronavirus outbreak. Gold prices also climbing today, at one point surging over 1.5%. They did recover from the biggest one-day decline in nearly 7 years. Now, traders say the potential for interest rate cuts by the U.S. Fed to soften the economic effect from the coronavirus outbreak has boosted sentiment on commodity markets. But of course, as coronavirus continues to cause insecurity on markets, gold prices are expected to continue rising. Well, let's take a short break now. Here's a look at what's coming up. How do you deal with the stress from the hustle and bustle of life? Well, the hyena could have some answers.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
And we are heading to Egypt now, where millions of dogs live in the streets. This has made diseases such as rabies more prevalent amongst residents there. Now, the issue has triggered violence against the animals, and as a result, non-governmental organizations in Egypt have now intensified their efforts to protect street dogs from harm. They're taming them and later putting them up for adoption. Here's CGTN's Adel El Maroui with a story.
Scavenging through trash where they find food, street dogs are used to living in residential areas. An estimated 200,000 Egyptians get bitten annually. Such threat has triggered many forms of violence against these stray canines. That behavior has encouraged many activist groups to take a proactive step by helping in managing that challenge.
The concept of NGOs helping stray dogs have been expanding lately. They fear disease and fear government efforts which could kill dogs without getting clearance from vets to check whether they are infected with disease or not. We started working to save these dogs.
A collaboration of NGOs and veterinarian hospitals has seen teams roam the streets of Cairo to capture street dogs. They cure their injuries, vaccinate and neuter the adults, then release them once again.
Once a dog undergoes this process, we mark their ears so they can be identified for people in the streets or for government's veterinarian authority that these dogs are risk-free. They can safely engage with humans.
What NGOs are hoping for is to create a culture of acceptance among Egyptians, one that could lead to adopting or at least help street dogs to find a safe home.
We always tell people don't buy dogs, adopt dogs. The principle of having a pet dog is the same and the pleasure is the same. But we humans have classified dogs and made more values for some breeds than the others. What we do is separate the dogs that can live in the street from those who need adoption. There are a lot of Egyptians volunteering to make adoption announcements.
To decrease fears from them, Egyptian activists are also trying to inform the public about the differences between rabid and healthy dogs. All of these efforts aim to decrease the population of dogs in the streets and therefore diminish the harm from them and done to them. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Now, here's some interesting news out of Somalia. Some mental health patients there are seeking treatment from hyenas. Traditionally, the creatures are believed to have the power to frighten away evil spirits, which of course are blamed for mental illness. Here's CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy with the story.
This hand-painted sign shows a hyena chasing away a naked spirit. It leads to a shack where a hyena is locked up in a cage and used to treat mental illness patients. Traditionally, the Somali people believe that hyenas frighten away or devour evil spirits blamed for mental illness. The treatment involves locking mentally ill people in rooms with the unrestrained animals, leaving them vulnerable to injury. But Abdikani Ibrahim says his treatment is a little different. He instead keeps the animal in a cage, well fed, and he does not let it free.
We brought this hyena here 4 years ago and treated a lot of people who had the evil spirit. So the hyena helped the people and treated them, and we hope Allah will give them good health.
The treatment cost $10 US. Continued professional psychiatric care in Somalia might cost thousands of dollars. Mohammed and his brother Abdi arrive for treatment in a tuk-tuk vehicle. After having red clothes tied to his fingers, Mohammed enters the shack. He sits facing the hyena, hoping the animal would frighten away the evil spirits that have troubled him for a long time.
My brother went mad after our father ordered him to divorce his beloved wife. He told him to marry another wife. After that, his wife left him, and day after day he developed headaches and started crying whenever he saw his wife. He became mad and we brought him here for treatment.
The World Health Organization says Somalia has only 3 psychiatrists countrywide. Many people opt to seek the help of traditional medicine when it comes to mental health.
Some Somali people believe that mental health patients can be treated through contact with hyenas. It is a traditional belief that patients with hands tied sitting in front of a hyena will cry and run away from it. That would remove the evil spirit from the patient. I do not believe that a patient who has mental health problems can be treated that way. It's not scientific.
Doctors say there is no scientific basis for the hyena mental illness treatment, but at least the cage prevents injury. Healthcare professionals are urging those who are mentally ill to instead seek for clinical treatment rather than traditional treatment. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN.
Well, let's move on now and take a look at Africa's currencies today. Nigeria's naira weakening, sliding past 400 naira per dollar on the one-year forward market. Now, that's after the country recorded its first case of coronavirus. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand firming up slightly today as a global sell-off linked to deepening fears over the impact of the coronavirus did pause. Traders say there is some profit taking and repositioning ahead of a batch of key economic data locally. Now, also increasing bets of an interest rate cut by the US Fed this week was driving some flows back into emerging market assets today. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and of course the rest of the team, thanks for watching.